Okay. Hi, I'm Dov.
Hi, I'm Daniel, and welcome to Post-Exertional Mayonnaise, a podcast about living with ME and chronic illness, creativity, and making meaning. How's things, Dov?
Things are okay. I'm in Massachusetts in the US, and it's there are more mosquitoes here than I think I've ever experienced. So that's been a little that's been a lot. Yeah. So I've made friends with a lot of mosquitoes the last few weeks, and but the heat wave has broken for a little while. I think it's gonna go back up, but it's nice that it's not quite as hot and it's cooling off a little at night. Am I getting
Good,
fuzzy? I
good.
think I might be getting fuzzy.
Yeah, we should be all right
I'll
in the end.
fix.
It should upload all right. So, yeah, no,
I
it's
think
it's
it's
we've here in Northumberland, in the northeast of England, we've just got standard English summertime. It's been warmish, but it's been wet quite a lot, so it's just been dull and wet. But yeah, hopefully we'll get maybe one nice week or so before the end of summer. We'll see. Yeah. So yeah, we just wanted to say thanks for everybody for feedback on the episode with Vlad Vexler. It was a really good conversation, and if you're new here because you've come via Vlad, then thank you for coming, and you're very welcome. And yeah, I really enjoyed the discussion. How did you find it, Dog? Because you watched it afterwards, didn't you?
yeah, I loved it. I wanted to listen to it a second time so I could talk about specific things, but I love what he said about sort of needing a hard hitting investigative journalism type. Either I forget if he said a documentary and or an article that that really addresses the history of the psychologization of ME,
Mm,
and I love sort of the more philosophical, thoughtful stuff, but I also love the specific address of sort of specific needs in order for the illness to stop being for people to he used the word unlovely for unlovely people to sort of continue to put forth this narrative that people with ME are have a psychological problem rather than a serious multi-system disabling, debilitating,
mm,
devastating illness. And not to.
mm,
I mean, I think like this is not to in any way minimize a how devastating it can be to to have any mental illness, and it's also acknowledging that with this illness often comes depression, but yeah, but I really appreciate um his sort of, and it was really interesting to me that he talked about that one of the reasons that people in psychology hold on to this narrative is because they sort of have work that they've done that they feel will sort of no longer be relevant. And I hadn't even thought, I think I
mm,
sometimes wonder why some of the medical doctors are so cruelly ferocious in their anti-ME rhetoric, and
mm,
um, but I hadn't thought about people who sort of have various kinds of either financial or social or sort of academic investments in this idea that ME was psychological. So that was really fascinating to hear him talk about that. And
mm,
it's really fun hearing him talk about music. I love what he said about he talked about a certain piece of music, which I looked up, and I want to ask him if he recommends any specific versions of it, for lack of better words. Anyways, I could say a lot, but those are a few things that come to mind. How about you?
yeah. I really appreciate what he was talking about because he's got such a sharp mind, and I was sort of saying, do you get because he does live streams on YouTube and on sort of philosophy in Russia, Ukraine, and I was kind of interested to know kind of if the brain fog affects that, and he's live streaming and things, and it was just good to know that that he experiences that as well in terms of having to manage that on a sort of like moment by moment basis when he's doing that, and he almost does sort of pregnant pauses and things, and for me that was really funny to think, actually, yeah, it looks like he's thinking really deeply, but actually sometimes he's just trying to think of the word that he's looking for. So yeah, I
Yeah.
could really identify with that. So no, it was good, and we've got quite a few brilliant interviews coming up, hopefully as well. I've got about 4 or 5 in the pipeline of different people, but we'll let you know when they're happening, when they come off, hopefully, just in case they don't happen. So, um, but yeah, no, thank you for everybody for your sort of kind comments on Vlad's episode, and also just generally. We got an email from Jessica in Australia. If you want to email, it's pempodcast23@gmail, and the email address will be in the notes as well. But yeah, no, I'll just read a little bit of this from Jessica. She says, "Hi, Dov and Dan. My name is Jess. I'm from Perth, a small city in Western Australia. I'm a fellow ME CFSer, and I'm writing to say thank you so much for creating this podcast. It has brought me a lot of joy and comfort and validation. Podcasts are one of my favourite mediums as I use them for my rest time, and it makes resting feel so much more enjoyable and less like a chore. I especially appreciated episode 6 and really resonated with everything you said. You both are obviously very intelligent and have a way of articulating things in a very thoughtful yet accessible way. I also love how you're showcasing that being chronically ill does not necessarily mean the end of one's creative pursuits. I've always loved art and did a lot of painting before I became unwell. Now I find it too exhausting, but I've recently gotten into earring making and finding this much easier as the task is smaller and can be done in several stages with lots of rest breaks in between. It's so nice to have a way to express my creativity again and to regain a small piece of my identity that is not related to chronic illness. Thank you for sharing your stories and those of others, as it gives me hope and inspiration. I look forward to hearing future episodes and appreciate the energy you use to make them. Kind regards, Jess." Thank you, Jessica, for that email. And if you want, you can go to our website, pempod.com, and see some of Jessica's earrings. So that's really, really great. She's got an Instagram link, so you can have a look on there as well. We got a brilliant tweet from Stefania as well. She says, hugely recommend this amazing podcast for anyone with ME or other chronic illness. It's brilliantly produced and from the heart, and so comforting to know we are not alone in what we experience with chronic illness. So thank you for that, and for all the feedback. It's been brilliant. Yeah. I did, a friend of mine on Facebook posted something really funny that I thought I would share as part of our cog fog corner, or brain fog corner, or cognitive dysfunction corner, or whatever you want to call it. So Hannah said she was talking to her mum as she checks her skin in the mirror. She said, "I'd be interested to know how these work. Did I tell you I bought some cyanide tablets?" And Mum had a horrified face, and she said, I'm going to struggle with this now. Niacinamide tablets," she said. But yeah, it's cyanide. Don't try cyanide tablets. Yeah, it's one of those things we just get mixed up in our brains, don't we? That similar words that are similar, and that's partly why we thought about the post-exertional mayonnaise, because it's almost like a brain fog thing, isn't it? Sort of something sounding similar that we use, and then our brains go in a completely different direction. So yeah, weird symptoms. Weird symptoms. We didn't get any feedback from last time from Kirsty's weird symptoms. So if you do go back and listen, yeah, have a think if that's relevant to you. One of the things I was going to mention was I get really bad leaking eyes. I put leaking eyes, watering eyes in the evenings. So if we're watching TV, sometimes it looks like I've completely getting upset at what I'm watching on the TV, but my eyes just start watering, like sometimes like 9, 10 o'clock in the evening. and they just like stream, and it's really frustrating. And I'm like sort of getting sort of water out of my eyes all the time. So I was just wondering if anybody else had something like that or got that experience. I don't necessarily get hay fever or anything, and it's not related. It's not like seasonal. It just kind of happens any time of the year. So yeah,
Do you
if
get it
if
often
you
at
do get like
night?
most evenings, yeah, most evenings I kind of get it, or I'll just be sort of sat watching TV or just on my phone or something, listening to music, and then my eyes will just start watering. I don't know why, it just happens, and it's just frustrating. So yeah, um, but yeah, it happens most evenings. It's just weird symptom. So um, yeah, so that's that bit. Um, Oh, we've got our fake advert now, in which I was contractually obliged to use the term nipple tassels. So, so, so yes, that was lots of fun, and I'm sure Lou Baker, who she's been doing the writing for us for the adverts, for Exhaustion Enterprises, and also doing the artwork. I'm sure she's basically just trying to give me more and more awkward things basically to say and to read. So yeah, this one is a special shower washing facility. So take a listen, and we'll be back in a minute.
Exhaustion Enterprises.
Need help getting washed? Wish you could have an attachment to your cabin bed to do the work for you? It's finally here. Exhaustion Enterprises are excited to present the Shower Shoot 2000. Put some power in your shower. Our Shower Shoot 2000 combines the thrills of a water park with the cleansing power of a car wash. It's as easy as 1, 2, 3 with the SS 2000. Simply attach the ankle cuff, which is attached to an advanced chain pulley system, and hit the big green go button. You don't even have to get undressed. Rely on the violent inertia of the start engine to effortlessly rip off your night clothes in an upward motion as you are transported down the chute. Once in the chute, you'll be massaged, soaped up, and scrubbed from head to toe via professional-grade rotating car wash brushes. Be prepared to be expelled at the other end clean, massaged, and vibrated violently for bonus lymphatic drainage. Once evicted from the chute, attach your complimentary sequined nipple tassels for modesty and make your way to the changing room. Your day is about to begin with zero energy expended. Nipple tassels available in nipple pink, sexy charcoal, and bile yellow. Loft bed sold separately. Note: leg shaver adapter not yet available due to the catastrophic malfunction of the prototype. All test subjects now have been released from hospital. Disclaimer: customers who purchase the SS2000 must sign a waiver that they can hold their breath for a minimum of 15 minutes underwater.
Exhaustion Enterprises.
Yes, so get your Shower Shoot 2000 if you want to, but you probably won't, so there you go. so, yeah, so we were going to discuss identity today, and thinking about what is identity, how does it impact us, and how does our identity, how do we identify with things, or how does our identity change? I was just thinking of it as a topic, and I think it's something we've talked about before, haven't we, Dov? Just like in our kind of random conversations that we've had. And I was
Yeah,
thinking about how
because when you
for me, I had to kind of really deconstruct kind of who I was, and deconstruct patriarchy, I suppose, because for me, I was like the main breadwinner in our family. And even though I was like a social worker and I'd done lots of stuff on feminism at university and thinking about patriarchal systems within society, and masculinity, I think I hadn't it hadn't impacted me really until I had to stop working, and then suddenly lots of hats that you previously wore are no longer part of your life. So I was no longer a social worker. I didn't have that hat on anymore, and I had to think about how that who I was in the world. And I think when we live with ME, we have to try and reestablish who we are or see ourselves differently, and that comes with a lot of grief and a lot of loss. Um, and I don't think we've got any massive answers to these questions, but it's just I hope that people can. I think it's something that people can identify with as we kind of get diagnosed with ME and have to live with the chronic illness and having to deal with the loss of what our former identity was. Um, but
Yeah,
you
for
were
you
thinking
it
about
sounds.
how. Go on.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, for you it sounds like a lot of your like that work was a central part of your identity, not just in terms of like I'm a social worker and that's part of my identity, but sort of your relationship to your family as somebody who works. I guess I'd just
Mm,
love to hear more about sort of, um, because for me, I don't think work, like being somebody who works, I guess was a part of my identity, but I wasn't, I guess I was in some ways thought of myself as a teacher, but like I don't think that I was had a similar investment. A, because I wasn't, like I don't have a family that I'm supporting or am part
mm,
of. So I guess for me, work plays a different role in terms of identity. So I'm just curious a bit. I'd love to just hear a little bit more about sort of how not working, how getting ME and then very suddenly, like you kind of very suddenly sort of ended
mm,
this career that, like, you'd been a social worker since you'd graduated from, that was like your
mm,
main career for your whole adult life until you got ME.
mm.
Um,
Yeah, I think for me it was. Um, I think how life just stops suddenly as well. Like, um, I was just aware of like all the things that I needed to do at work, and then just suddenly not being at work and not being able to do those things. Um, I wouldn't say social worker was made up my whole identity, and I was like dependent on that. But you suddenly realize like how you. I think you can start and see how society categorizes people into what you do, and often when you meet somebody new, it's one of the first questions that you maybe ask them. Oh, what do you do? And then when you suddenly realize, well, I don't do anything. What do I do? And then you realize actually, yeah, I'm a father and I'm a husband. And those are the things that kind of became really central for me. Not that they weren't
yeah,
central before, because they came before my work, obviously, but I think I saw that I had to readjust my kind of priorities based on the amount of energy that I had, which was like really minimal. My life became about sort of like feeding my family, or in terms of practically sort of like having providing meals. While my wife increased her work hours and went to work full time, but also um, for me, it was about kind of seeing the value in my wife's work, and actually that she's gone on to you know enjoy working full time and earning kind of money that to help us as a family. So yeah, so for me it was sort of you can see all those things around sort of the patriarchal systems in society, and but then having to step back from that and look at it actually when it really does impact you in a big way, and having to sort of deconstruct that, and it's fine for women to be the main breadwinner, um, and I know that in terms of ME, there's a high percentage of women that do have ME, but then it means that for those women that they're impacted by those patriarchal systems as well, because suddenly they can't be those sort of members of society that go out and work and have a career and have that fulfillment in life that maybe that we were all looking for in a way. So, but I know you wanted to talk about what identity really is as well, weren't you? I think that was something you were thinking about.
yeah. Well, I think like, for me, I've like, as somebody who's queer and trans, and like I feel like my identity has, in many ways, like at a pretty young age, like I think I've been thinking about identity since I was pretty young because
Mm.
and um and one thing, like I think being Jewish has sort of been one of my primary, and think about like why, like yes, I'm Jewish, yes, I'm queer, but why are those things like sort of so central, or have they
Mm.
been such central parts of my identity? And I think I'm sort of, sometimes I think it's about marginalization and being part of, in some ways I think I was kind of forced to sort of really um really foster, sorry, I'm getting there's not enough light, and then here we go, sorry about that, I got blurry. um I think as a young transmasc person in the early 1990s, I was forced to, not forced, but I think fostering a queer identity was part of my survival strategy, because I wasn't safe in other places. And I think about is sort of the way we shape our identity around feeling safe, feeling at home, around being
Mm.
forced into situations where we're almost, this is probably a very bad word to use, but kind of get it. And I think this is true for some people more than other, kind of ghettoized, because of our
Mm.
identities, because either in the sense of like only being safe in certain places or only allowed in certain places, and sort of, um I feel really uncomfortable about using that word, but it is an interesting, I
Mm.
think like,
Yeah.
um the when I think about sort of the history of the word ghetto, as it comes from Jews in Venice in like the 1600s, and about how Jews weren't allowed to work out. They were like, they were there were a lot of sort of rules about when they could leave the ghetto and what kind of work they could do, and it was a very limiting thing. And I think that people, like with different sort of, all of our identities are fluid and shifting,
Mm.
and I think the way we come to, and complicated, and the way we come to sort of our complicated identities can happen for so many reasons. And I think for me, like a lot of the reasons that I came to really identify with Jewishness and queerness was because of feeling safe in those spaces. And I think with ME, it's like I'm not in those spaces anymore. I barely, like, outside of
Mm.
identifying with someone with ME and someone being disabled, I think I've lost a lot of sense of other kinds of ways that I sort of constructed my identity. I don't know. I don't know if I'm saying any of this well, but it's really fascinating
No,
to
no.
me, to sort of have an illness that kind of forces me out of all of the social, um, structures that have helped me sort of maintain a sense of certain kinds of identity. I identified as somebody who was very physically active. I identified as somebody who was a swimmer, who was a writer, who went to synagogue, who very invested in Jewish community, and yeah. And now it's like I don't know how to construct my sense of identity outside of like somebody who stares at walls, somebody who listens to a lot of audiobooks. It's not that I don't still identify as Jewish and queer, but it doesn't have the same resonance, when I no longer feel really connected, socially linked to those kinds of communities and spaces. I think I
Mm.
feel in many ways much more socially linked to people who have ME in a lot of ways, or just, socially linked to people based on one relationships rather than on a sense of like community. I don't know. Um, I, I know I'm not being very articulate, but for now, I'll just leave it there and love to hear any thoughts you have.
Yeah, I think, and that's where I think you're right. I think we shape ourselves um, by the systems that we move in, don't we? And yeah, like I think the online community became really important. That we kind of live our lives online almost, or I certainly do in terms of my friendships. There's people that I messaged, on an almost daily basis, or in terms of developing friendships. And then yeah, it's how our worlds become smaller, and like a couple of years ago we had we had a storm that basically cut our electricity off for about 5 days, and suddenly being without electricity and internet for 5 days, you realize like how much you become dependent on that for peer support and for um, feeling present in the world. And I guess that shows how things have changed over the last like 20, 30 years in terms of the internet and accessibility for things that we just didn't have access to in the past. So as a chronic illness community, we're in a much better position because of the internet, things like video, conferencing, and being able to make a podcast like this. And I think that's the podcast itself, and making this as a platform has been something that's been really important to me over the last few months, because it's given me that sort of sense of identity as, okay, I can put, I'm a podcast host. Sounds fancy on my, on a bio or something like that. But um, uh, I think when we lose our possibility for work, we have to readdress, like, um, how does our perceptions of ourselves change? Um, and then it's almost a constantly reevaluating that and who we are in our bodies on a day-to-day basis that is such a challenge in terms of having to process. Yeah, and then thinking, okay, well, first and foremost, I'm like a husband and a dad, and those things kind of come into it. But for those that don't have family networks like that, it becomes really difficult to kind of like have a sense of self, doesn't it? And how do you define yourself? And maybe maybe people with chronic illness and ME, we almost have to transcend societal perceptions of identity, because we don't move within the usual systems within society that kind of label ourselves. So in some ways it can be quite a freeing thing not to have to live with any labels, or not to have to live up to any societal expectations. But at the same time, it's a massive kind of grieving process that we go through, that we're not living within society and living kind of active lives as part of the world that we kind of inhabit, because we still do inhabit the world. We're still present here, but when we're somehow missing. I guess that's the millions missing thing, isn't it? But one of the things I put on notes is almost having a sense of compassion for ourselves, and seeing ourselves, addressing ourselves, because we put so much pressure on ourselves, don't we, to the limited energy that we have every day to make something worthwhile with that energy, whether that's like washing some clothes or emptying a dishwasher. But and we put pressure on ourselves to kind of live up to some sort of level of existence, that we've achieved something in the day. But I think it's so important that we do have compassion for ourselves, and having to remind ourselves, addressing ourselves as we would address somebody else in our condition, because so often we'll have compassion for other people, but we don't always have compassion for ourselves, because we feel like we've got to live up to some sort of societal expectation for ourselves, and
Right, like
that's not
there's this
always easy,
idea
is it?
of value, like what is your
Mm,
value in a social context? And I think like
mm,
one thing that I really appreciate, I mean, having ME is, it's catastrophic and it's devastating.
mm,
And I'm not looking for silver linings here, but one thing I do appreciate about having ME is that it gives me a place to, it's like from which to think about cultural values and cultural norms and cultural ideas. And I think I fancied myself somebody who was a very careful, critical thinker before I got ME. But I feel like since I've had ME, I'm so outside of, like, I'm outside of, I'm like, it's like I've traveled to a different planet. And so when I look at the way things work
Mm.
socially, I feel like I have even more space to be able to critically think about, what do we think it means to have value as a person, and like who who fancies themselves as sort of being morally superior than who, and why are the
Mm.
systems, why are there not more social support systems? I think a lot about sort of, as a sick person, a lot of people who don't have a devastating illness feel morally superior to me because they think that they have the answer to health that I fail to have. And so it's like, it's really fascinating to sort of really get to see the machinery of how people think. And it's not fun, and it's a lot of times it's really sad, and it's there's a lot of cruelty there, but I do think that it has offered me a space with which to really um, deeply think about social structures, community structures, how people
Mm.
treat each other, how people understand themselves and each other, and it's surprising. It's I think that, like, I was part of a community before I got ME. I was part of a Jewish community where I felt like pretty deeply valued. Like, I felt I was a teacher of religious school with kids who I'd worked with for several years, and who had sort of wanted to work with me until the kids all became b'nai mitzvah, like had their bar bat mitzvah, etc. And I felt that I was a very important person in this community to a lot of people. And then when I vanished, like, I never heard from anyone, and like,
Mm.
literally, it's like they forgot about me in an instant. And I reached out to a few people and never heard back. It's I think, like, there were communities that was part of, where I thought that I where people valued me, where it just became very clear that I, once I became sick, I was no longer somebody,
Mm.
I was no longer had any value to anyone in that community. That's certainly how it felt. And
Mm.
it was I still struggle with it 9 years later, and I'm still struggling with it. But it's also something that gives me a lot of it really allows me to think seriously about how I'm sort of valuing and treating other people, and to sort of
Mm.
understand how much work we need to do to sort of do a better job of valuing each other for just, like, being human rather than being workers, or
Yeah.
being, it's yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
And that's where I think I just put in our notes, seeing ourselves holistically, as in
Yeah.
seeing ourselves as a whole person, rather than just a person with ME, and seeing that, actually recognizing that we do have like emotional needs, and we have, you know um, we are people in the world, as opposed to just a label of a chronically ill person that we're struggling and wrestling with that identity in itself. But I think it's important that we do kind of like recognize that as part of ourselves and part of our identity, and it's a difficult balance, isn't it? One of the things that I was thinking about is the sort of disability label for people with ME, and how, whether some people see themselves as disabled or some people don't. And for me, it's a really difficult one, because I very much do see myself as disabled. I've got a disabled parking badge, but I don't always feel comfortable with that, because at university when we did, social work, we talked about models of disability and the medical model of disability and the social model, and looking at, stressing the social model has been really important, especially within the social work sort of profession, because it's about how society can adapt to enable disabled people to be part of society. And so often it feels for me that um, I can't see myself as that because there's nothing that society can do to enable me to be part of it in a very
Right.
practical way because of post-exertional malaise, and because of that significant symptom that we have, that actually anything we do has a massive impact, so we just often
Yeah.
don't do
And can I
anything
just add, for
because
me, like sensory stuff, like
yeah.
I think for me, one of the things that even if somebody could like bring me somewhere and I could use a wheelchair and not be necessarily exerting myself a ton, like it's hard to sit up at all, and B, like this, I don't think there's anywhere in the world that's sensory accessible, and that, so that I think
Mm,
that kind of accessibility is not so much part of the social model, at least not as much as it could be.
mm. And just, yeah, not even um and I know many people with ME kind of get out and about in wheelchairs and mobility scooters and things like that, but for me it's either I can be out and I can walk a little bit, which is rare, or I just don't have the energy to go out at all. So
Yeah.
it's a difficult one, isn't it? And then always looking for like um, seating and things like that. I went with a friend. Our family went with a friend's family. One of the few things I did last summer. Some a friend with ME that I met on Twitter came up to Northumberland for a holiday, and we went to some gardens where I'd booked a mobility scooter. Hadn't used one before, and I thought, okay, this is an opportunity. But by the time we got there in the afternoon, because they hadn't asked me to specify a time, so I thought, well, that'll be there for the day. Got there in the afternoon, and actually they just didn't have one. And it's things like that are huge barriers, but that actually um, places don't really recognise that actually that's such an important need for just mobility for a start. So yeah, I think the illness itself um, stops us from um, gaining access because of and then when we do take steps to try and kind of access places, they become inaccessible by just a lack of thought, really, or lack of really small things. Like I read on Twitter, was sort of stuck in a station in London because a lift was broken, and they were in a wheelchair. Like, how do you? And there was just nobody around to help. Like, how do you address those things? Because we live in a society where disability is just um, not really addressed. Really, it's almost like an
Mhm.
inconvenience, I think.
Yeah,
So yeah,
accessibility
it's
seems like an afterthought in a lot of ways, and it's not centered. And then for people with ME, it's like even if it were centered, for a lot of us, we still couldn't go anywhere. I know for me, like a, people in my life are always like, "Why don't you do this online? Why don't you do that online?" Like, at least post COVID, there's a bit more stuff that's accessible online, and I think COVID did, for a lot of people, allow, at least for a time. I think there are some people with this illness who were able to access spaces more through video. I think a lot of
mm,
that has gone by the wayside since people don't think there's a pandemic anymore. And but I know for me, I can't even do stuff on video because it's just it's the sensory stuff is not manageable.
mm,
It's still a lot of exertion in terms of social, in terms of all the sensory processing, information processing. Yeah, so I do, I think in an ideal world, there would be a lot more stuff that's accessible via video, and general accessibility would be much more centered. Um, but I think for people with ME, it's in a lot of ways it can be neither here nor there. If
Yeah.
just getting out of bed is not manageable,
Yeah.
or sensory, like sound. I think one thing that's kind of funny is that I tried to go for a minute to like an ME support group, and even then there was like people. There was somebody who was like driving while doing. There was like I couldn't even deal with the sensory information
Mm,
like in the ME support group. Anyways,
mm.
um,
No, I just thought I'd tell a story from yesterday, actually, for me.
yeah,
Uh, about I went to the pharmacy, and it was the first time I'd been out in about oh, actually, I was out last week. I've picked up a little bit after COVID, but probably the third time that I've been out anywhere significant in about 6 or 8 weeks. And I thought, okay, I'm going to drive. I'm going to drive to the pharmacy to pick up my prescription. Managed to park like literally a few yards away from the door. Got out of my car, and then there's like an old man that's walking down the street with a stick. And we're both kind of like getting towards the door of the pharmacy at about the same time. And I'm thinking, and I hadn't taken my stick actually because I thought, well, it's not. It's like literally a few paces away from the door. But then I thought I'd rather get in there first, so I'm not kind of standing and waiting around in the pharmacy. But I thought I can't do that because it would just look terrible if I looked like an able person, kind of like skipping in through the door before this old fella. So I let him go in, and thankfully he wasn't in there for very long at all. He was in quite quickly, and there's usually hardly anybody in that place because it's quite a rural area. And he was in and out, and then I got mine. But even like probably like the minute while he was being served, I was like leaning up against a counter and just feeling really alien within that environment, like just not. And I think that's part of the problem is that even when we are able to access sort of society, and just being in a shop like that, um, it just felt like being an alien on a foreign, like you said, sort of you've sort of been transplanted to a different universe, or on a different world, and I don't know if it was the fluorescent lighting or what it was, but yeah, just feeling, and then I was served really quickly, and I got out of there really quickly, but um, and I was the only person in there after the old guy had gone, but it just felt like to me, um, yeah, like I was probably more disabled than the old fella
yeah,
in terms of mobility to like how long I could stand, how far I could
yeah,
walk. Um, but nobody would know that because I didn't even sort of carry my stick on that occasion. Um,
yeah,
and yeah, it feels like it feels because it is an invisible illness, but it also just feels like we're sort of somehow aliens on a different planet somehow, and we're here but we're not here, and it's such a difficult thing to process because people don't see, like I would have just looked like a normal healthy person walking into the chemist.
yeah. I
Yeah,
never go
just
anywhere without my cane because I have to walk so slow that people look at me like they make assumptions
mm,
about, they make people are judgy as fuck. And like when people see me trying to walk with ME, they think that I'm, that I remember people just like looking at me like I was like a societal menace. I don't know if they thought I was
mm,
drunk or what, but it was like so terrible. But was it, I wanted to kind of bring it back a little to the
mm,
question of identity, and I think Dan is, I don't know, tell me if this is true. I think you're sort of asking if people with ME, like if people with MID with ME. Sorry, I'm having a lot of
MIT, I heard of that
ME
one.
moments today.
It's all right.
If people with ME understand, if you understand yourselves as, if this, if you, if like being disabled sort of feels like a meaningful or apt, sorry, I'm not using words great, but part of your identity. I think for me, I
Mm,
definitely identify deeply with disability, but I also see it as like a very big umbrella term.
mm,
And so I think I more specifically uh, like identify with people with people with chronic illness type disabilities and people with ME. But but I don't know how that, as an identity, I'm not sure how that works structurally in my life. I couldn't really say, because I mean, it definitely allows me
Mm,
access to people who share my life experiences, and that's really meaningful and and makes me feel connected. Like, I love reading things on social media that people write about, you know, about ME related stuff, but I wouldn't know how to quite put into words what it means to me to like have being someone with ME be part of my identity. What do you
mm.
think? Any thoughts on that, Dan, or any?
It it feels, yeah. I think we use so many labels in life, don't we? That kind of like we say we're this or we're that, or yeah, we wear different hats. Yeah, I mean, I think I would see myself as a person with ME, and probably I would see myself as that before I would see myself as a disabled person, um, because like I said, the sort of disability, it's a massive umbrella, and I am disabled, but it's not society that disables me, because of it's the illness itself that prevents me accessing society, because there's very little that could be done by society to enable me to access it. In that sense, yeah. Um,
Yeah, sorry, I'm
hmm,
my I, I keep going blurry because I guess I need more light, but I can't really deal with more light. Um, and then
hmm.
I keep trying
Yeah,
to
I've
get
got
it.
two big
Anyways,
things.
what?
No, I've got two big lights shining at me, and then I think, oh, I should switch them off, but it helps people see. So,
Yeah,
um, yeah,
I like having
yeah.
very low light, but then I get blurry, and then I have to put light on me to make it unblurry again, which I feel like is probably distracting and annoying. But yeah, I don't. Maybe I need a better camera. I don't know. But anyways, yeah. So I think I think we always, I think when we're doing these podcasts, we're always really interested in what your experiences are and how you think about all these things. So we'd be really
Mm,
interested in hearing from you about what it means to you. Like, I think identity, the question of identity, is a philosophical one that is unanswerable, and everybody sort
mm,
of has a different relationship to what it means to like have a multiplicity of intersecting identities. But I wonder how people with ME sort of um, find that influences or affects their sense of identity, and what that means. What that means to you. I would be really interested in hearing about that. I think, Dan, when you talk about going, it's just so wild. Yeah, to think that like we're living in such a different world, that like the amount of time it takes for you to allow somebody who like is visibly like is older than you and uses a stick and like goes into a store, and sort of the optics of that are like you're a young guy who quote looks healthy,
mm.
who's like, it would look so rude for you to sort of go in front.
Yeah.
But the reality is that um you know it makes me think of like when I used to live on, before I moved to where I live now. I lived on a street, and there were often people in their 70s and 80s like riding their bikes by, like whooshing by on their bikes, doing
Mm,
their exercise. And I just would, I would feel, I think sometimes I have some bitterness around, not being able to do anything. But I would just think of it was
mm,
also a little funny to think that there are these people who are in their 70s and 80s and 90s who have a lot more capacities than I do.
mm,
And, I think we all have, I think, um, not that I love thinking about what it means to be a human in terms of like capacities, but it's just kind of the irony of having an illness where people don't really
mm,
um, want to acknowledge the seriousness of it. And then and that's part of why I think for me it's so important. It's such an important part of my identity, in the sense that like I get so little sort of understanding from people who don't have ME that it makes it even more important to sort of have this community of people who do have ME. I
Mm.
completely lost my train of thought, but um,
No, that's right.
Dan,
I think, yeah, I think, yeah, I think we're sort of. It would be good to hear sort of people's thoughts on how they kind of view themselves and how they've adapted to life with ME and having to grieve past forms of identity and then I think it's even harder for maybe people that have been ill since they've been young, um, to that they've never shaped an identity within the world in
yeah,
themselves because they've never been able to. I've got so much empathy for those people that have been ill for so long, and not been out there. So there's the kind of two sides, isn't there? There's people with ME that have kind of almost like grown up living with the illness, and then there's those of us that have kind of had life opportunities and then having lost them. And yeah, it's so hard. It might be a good time to read this poem by Maya.
yeah, before you
Her
do that,
poem
just
was
one
featured.
thing, because I think this
Go on.
ties back really nicely into kind of a lot of what we're doing here, which is thinking about like what kind of, for those of us who have the capacities and the desire to do creative work, I think for a lot of us that is a lot of how it's so meaningful, because and part of that is because it's there is so little that we have access to create meaning in our lives, and so I think
Mm,
like even if, for me doing this podcast is feels like a really meaningful thing, and whenever I'm able to write it feels so meaningful, and like taking photographs feels so meaningful, and I think like creativity or like creative pursuits um can really be um such an important part of can be so important for those of
expressing.
us. Yeah, you go. Do you want to try and
Yeah,
finish my
no,
thought here?
yeah, no, just expressing ourselves in terms of having some sort of expression, and I think music and poetry and things like that, art, even like at the beginning we talked about Jessica's earring making, just things like that. Actually, the creating something to mark a stamp on the world, and I think hopefully next week I'm going to speak to Sarah Boothby, and her daughter Maeve died in 2021 and from ME. And before Maeve died, she wrote a novel, and I'm so excited to learn a bit more about Maeve's writing and something that she's uh, left for the world. And you know, it must have been such a hard process for her to go through to write while kind of declining in health and energy levels, but she was so determined that this is something that she wanted to write. And I think there's something in all of us with ME that we want something to show for ourselves, whether that's a piece of poetry or just a piece of music or a blog. Like there's so many people that blog the experiences um, because we want to feel some sort of meaning in the world and some sort of presence in the world. And I think that for me, it was like when I first got ill, often on social media, like Facebook's not a great place necessarily for unless you're in a group because people don't know how to respond to you writing about ME in that forum. So like for me, I was like blogging an awful lot, and people were picking up and reading my blogs because it was like um, just hear what I'm going through. Like somebody needs to listen to this. That it's like it's so frustrating, and that's why I was going to read this poem by Maya, whose poem was featured on poets.org as a poem of the day a week or two ago, and I think she's writing about uh, the need for stability living with chronic illness and not having stability and feeling not present in the world, and it's a beautiful piece. She's from Finland, and you can go and listen to her reading it as well on poets.org, and I'll put a link as well. But I'll read this one, then we've got another poem to come. But Sue, I don't know if you've read this one. I don't know if I sent it to you, Dov, but this is called Ship Stroke Plum. The ears lie, but claim. The eyes lie, or perhaps the body. Either way, the world is a ship. I call it vestibular unease, as I glance smartly over my glasses, motion sick in my stationary body. The fancy word just means I live on a yellow submarine, not quite as glamorous as it sounds. You should be able to sink your heels pleasurably into the floor, enjoy the solidity of the world. Reality is not supposed to have give like an overripe plum. I prefer wooden floors to marble, but even plastic laminate is okay. It keeps you upright and springy. I refuse to live on a ship stroke plum. I have no navigatory skills, and I don't want to be the stone inside gooey fruit flesh. Straight horizons should be mandated by law. Don't make the world turn wrinkly like my fingers after bathing. I crave stability, but refuse to be the stone. Yeah, it's there's so much in there. So yeah, thank you, Maya, for allowing us to read it on the podcast as well. But we crave stability, but our world changes every day, and Maya, it changes, but it's the same every day sometimes, isn't it? When we kind of like, it feels like Groundhog Day every day, but because of the symptoms that come and go, we're kind of living with a different type of ME every day as well. And if you go on, I'll put the link. Maya also on the bit where she reads, she says a little bit about her chronic illness and living with that and what the poem means to her. So yeah, thank you, Maya, for allowing us to share that.
Did you want to? Was there
Yeah,
one more
so
poem you wanted to read?
yeah, I'm going to play that. We've got a video with it, with the words that are going to show up. So we'll play that, and then I've got another piece that Rami, uh, who's on Twitter, he plays some beautiful pieces and sort of shows clips of him playing that, despite struggling with ME, sort of playing some beautiful um, classical pieces. So I'll play. We'll play Liz's poem, and then we'll finish with the piano piece by Rami. But was there anything else that you want to say, Dov, before we finish?
Um, well, one thing that we were going to talk about a bit was the idea of the like illness worrier or the chronic illness worrier, and I think we should save
Oh
that for
yeah.
another time. Um,
Hmm.
and because I think, um, yeah, what do you think? Should we save that for another time? I'll just say in short form that it is definitely not something that I identify with at all, even though I identify deeply with that the fact that, like, being chronically ill can really feel like a daily battle, but I think that as far as like an identity, and it seems like an interesting identity term that a lot of people that resonates with a lot of people, and
Hmm.
it doesn't resonate with me, and I think part of that is because, like, I don't want to think of myself as fighting. I want to think of myself as living. I'm somebody who's living, and
Hmm.
I'm living with illness, and but I think we could also have a much longer discussion about that. But it was on our
Yeah.
list, so I
I
just
think.
thought I'd bring it up before we
Yeah.
go.
No. No. It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because um, I think some people do kind of like take that label as a chronic illness warrior, and um, I struggle with that one as well because it feels um, that you can't really fight this illness. And I think the narrative of fighting illness is hard when the illness you're never going to win. um,
Right.
when it's like yeah, like the poem I refuse to live on a ship. It's like
Yeah.
we do live on ships and we don't want to, and we're sort of tossed around, and so yeah, we're sort of like we can I think we can fight it in a way, because we can be determined that, you know, we don't want to live with this illness, and it's not. There's a fine balance, isn't there, between acceptance and battling, and sometimes I've written songs with this sort of battle narrative, but at other times I've written things about surrendering to it, because and I think that it very much depends on where we're feeling, where we're at, and how we're feeling about how our relationship with the illness is. Because sometimes
Right.
we
But
just
it's,
have to
I
give
think,
into
like,
it.
to me, there's this moral, I guess to me, there's this moral pressure from coming from the outside, that if you're not fighting your illness, that you're somehow morally
Yeah. Oh,
less
definitely.
than. And I think
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
as someone with, I think that the only reason I have any quality of life is because I'm not using the little bit of spoons I have to fight. I'm using the little bit of spoons I have to create some kind of quality of life for myself.
Yeah, yeah.
So
And
yeah,
it's how much we invest in that. Yeah, and how much we kind of like, um, yeah. And I think there's a difference between like being an ME activist and somebody who's like see himself as a warrior, because being a warrior is somebody who, it's almost saying you can achieve, you can overcome. And actually, that's very different from being an activist that's trying to raise awareness for things, um,
right.
within
Yeah, and I
government
guess
or
I don't
whatever.
always know when people say they're an illness warrior, if they mean they're like fighting for their right to exist in the world with illness, or
Yeah,
do they feel like their value comes from fighting against the illness itself? And I don't think anybody's value should come from their capacity to fight an illness. Like,
no,
you are not
yeah, and,
better
and that's
than
very different.
someone else if you are able to like fight an illness. And it's like I want to value everyone on who's you know doing their best to live with illness in a world that doesn't support us. I
Mm,
just want to value
yeah,
people for just existing, and like, you have value because you are you, not because you are fighting.
yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And that's the kind of like, um, that's the line, isn't it? It's that's very much the difference in terms of like, yeah, we're first and foremost like people that have value in ourselves, and I think that's so important to recognize, and for everybody listening, it's like, yeah, I think it's so important that we have compassion for ourselves, and compassion, um, yeah, see ourselves how we would see others with the condition, and live in that way, and to look after ourselves as best we can within the scope of the illness. So, yeah, thanks for listening. And we've got a poem, Behind Clouds by Lizzie Horn, and then a beautiful piano piece by Rami just to finish. And then hopefully speak to you next time.
Yeah, please let us know if you have any strange, is it weird or strange? I always forget if it's a weird or strange let us know if you have strange symptoms that you want us to ask people about. Like, we like every week to do this where we read off symptoms that people have, where they feel like they've not met other people with the symptoms, because it can be helpful to know if other people have similar symptoms. There's also a bit about that on our website. And then also, if you have any um, cog fog stories you want to share, Dan often finds them on Twitter, but funny things that
Yeah.
happen from brain fog. Yeah.
And if you want us any poems you want us to read, I've still got kind of like a bit of a number of different poems that we've got lined up. But yeah, thanks for all your submissions. And if you want to email us, do that as well. So thanks for your time, and we'll speak to you soon.
Yes. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
There is a stifled sadness today, right through my core. It takes my breath away. I wonder if I can take much more, because my world has shrunken, 4 walls and a floor, 14 years and counting, the future unsure. I remember how it was to feel well, a glorious and distant memory, the time before hell, the time where I was free, not a broken shell, able to just be me. And I'm clawing at the future, trying not to lose my grip, with no treatment or sign of a cure, trying not to let my mask slip, to not feel broken by this, wondering how much more can I endure. They say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but all I want is life. I have to keep going for how much longer? None of this is right. They say it's a real battle, but how much longer do I have to fight? We adapted, readjusted, and made the best. But even the pared down life results in need for months of rest. How much more do I have to hand over until I become lesser, lessed?